What if I told you that the greatest danger to our civilization isn't the criminal masterminds portrayed in Hollywood films, but rather the well-intentioned fool next door? The person who forwards conspiracy theories without checking sources. The manager who implements counterproductive policies despite mountains of evidence against them. The voter who consistently supports policies that harm their own interests. We lock our doors at night to keep criminals out, but what defenses do we have against stupidity? Carlo Cipolla, an Italian economic historian, once provocatively claimed that stupid people are more dangerous than bandits. At first glance, this statement seems absurd. How could someone who simply lacks judgment pose a greater threat than someone actively intent on causing harm? Yet there's profound wisdom in this observation that transcends mere insult. This isn't about intelligence in the traditional sense of IQ scores or academic achievement. Rather, it's about a peculiar form of cognitive blindness that affects people across all education levels and social classes, a blindness that not only prevents individuals from recognizing the consequences of their actions, but often leads them to vehemently defend those actions despite overwhelming evidence of harm. Let us be clear. This exploration isn't meant to divide humanity into smart and stupid camps. Each of us is capable of stunning stupidity in certain contexts. The question isn't whether we sometimes act stupidly, we all do, but rather how we might recognize and counteract the dangerous forms of stupidity that threaten our collective well-being. To understand why stupidity can be more dangerous than criminality, we need a framework to identify it first. In 1976, Carlo Cipolla published a satirical yet profound essay titled The Basic Laws of Human Stupidity. Though written with tongue partially in cheek, his analysis offers startling insights into why stupid behaviors persist and why they're so dangerous. Cipolla's first law states, "Always and inevitably, everyone underestimates the number of stupid individuals in circulation." This isn't mere cynicism, it's an observation about our cognitive biases. We naturally assume rationality in others, making it difficult to recognize when someone is acting against both their interests and the collective good. But what exactly constitutes stupidity in Cipolla's framework? His ingenious classification system divides people into 4 types based on how their actions affect themselves and others. The intelligent. People whose actions benefit both themselves and others. The bandits. People whose actions benefit themselves at others' expense. The helpless. People whose actions harm themselves but benefit others. The stupid. People whose actions harm both themselves and others. Consider this framework for a moment. Criminals act in self-interest. While their actions harm society, they at least follow a twisted internal logic. The criminal who steals your wallet gains something concrete from harming you. But the stupid person, they'll set fire to your house while accidentally burning down their own. They'll spread vaccine misinformation that ultimately undermines the very healthcare system they might need tomorrow. They'll vote for policies that eliminate protections they themselves depend on. Consider the small business owner who refuses to implement basic safety measures during a pandemic, loudly proclaiming it's about freedom. Their store becomes a hotspot, infections spread, the community is forced into stricter lockdowns, and ultimately their business suffers far more than if they'd simply followed guidelines. Both they and everyone around them lose, the definition of stupidity in action. What makes these behaviors particularly dangerous is that we have few defenses against stupidity. Many of our social norms, politeness, benefit of the doubt, democratic principles, can inadvertently empower stupid behaviors by treating them as merely alternative viewpoints deserving equal consideration. But stupidity isn't just an individual problem. It's contagious, and here's why. Friedrich Nietzsche, the 19th century German philosopher, observed that humans often surrender individual critical thinking to join what he called the herd. While his analysis predated modern psychology by decades, contemporary research has validated many of his insights. The surest way to corrupt a youth, Nietzsche wrote, is to instruct him to hold in higher esteem those who think alike than those who think differently. This observation cuts to the heart of why stupidity often flourishes in groups. Consider how social media algorithms create echo chambers. When Sarah logs onto her favorite platform, she's shown content that aligns with her existing beliefs, no matter how unfounded. Over time, she sees fewer opposing viewpoints and more extreme versions of her own. What began as mild skepticism transforms into unshakable conspiracy theories, because everyone in her feed seems to believe the same thing. Solomon Asch's conformity experiments from the 1950s demonstrated that many people will deny obvious physical reality, like the comparative length of 2 lines, if surrounded by others who unanimously contradict what they see with their own eyes. What's particularly troubling is that when a belief becomes entangled with group identity, challenging that belief feels like an attack on the group itself. The result? Cognitive fortifications that render counter-evidence not just unconvincing, but actually threatening. Think about a time you found yourself agreeing with a group despite having doubts. What made it difficult to speak up? What would have made it easier? This brings us to a crucial paradox. Why do those who know the least often speak with the most confidence? In 1999, psychologists David Dunning and Dunning-Kruger discovered a cognitive bias wherein people with limited knowledge in a specific domain greatly overestimate their abilities. The essence of the Dunning-Kruger effect is this: the skills needed to recognize incompetence are the very same skills needed for competence. In their original study, participants who scored in the bottom quartile estimated their abilities to be far above average, believing they outperformed 62% of their peers when in reality they outperformed just 12%. Why does this happen? Without fundamental knowledge in a domain, individuals lack the metacognitive ability to recognize their own limitations. They don't know what they don't know. This connects directly to Daniel Kahneman's influential work on System 1 and System 2 thinking. Kahneman describes System 1 as our fast, intuitive, and emotional thinking process, while System 2 is our slower, more deliberative, and logical thinking. Stupidity often thrives when we rely exclusively on System 1 thinking for complex matters that demand System 2 analysis. The confident fool speaks quickly from gut instinct, while the thoughtful expert pauses to engage their analytical faculties. Meet John, who read a few articles about economics and now confidently explains complex market forces to anyone who will listen. When actual economists offer nuanced perspectives, John dismisses them as overthinking it. Meanwhile, those economists, aware of the field's complexities, offer careful, qualified statements that sound less convincing to laypeople than John's confident proclamations. This effect becomes particularly dangerous when combined with modern communication technologies. In earlier eras, gaining a public platform required passing through gatekeepers who filtered out the most egregious forms of ignorance. Today, anyone can broadcast opinions to millions, regardless of expertise. But let's be clear. We are all susceptible to overconfidence in areas where our knowledge is limited. The distinction lies between those who recognize their cognitive limitations and those who don't. These aren't just academic concepts. The real-world consequences of stupidity can be devastating. Throughout history, stupid decisions have led to catastrophes that dwarf the damage caused by deliberate criminality. During the 2008 financial crisis, major financial institutions packaged high-risk subprime mortgages as safe investments. These weren't just criminals exploiting others. Many executives believed their own hype, kept these toxic assets in their own portfolios, and ultimately destroyed their own companies along with millions of innocent people's livelihoods. Or examine how misinformation spreads during public health crises. During the COVID-19 pandemic, individuals who rejected protective measures based on misunderstood notions of freedom increased not only their personal risk, but also endangered their communities. Consider the case of environmental degradation by industries pursuing short-term profits through practices that ultimately destroy the natural resources their businesses depend on. The fishing company that lobbies against sustainable catch limits only to face collapsing fish stocks years later exemplifies stupidity's circular harm. What makes these situations particularly tragic is that they often involve otherwise intelligent people. The investment banker with the Ivy League degree, the successful business owner sharing health misinformation, the brilliant engineer designing unsustainable systems, these aren't individuals lacking cognitive capacity. Rather, they've fallen prey to cognitive biases, social pressures, or ideological blindness. As Isaac Asimov noted, the strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. If stupidity is so harmful, why does it persist? The answer lies in the systems we've built. Modern society contains numerous mechanisms that not only tolerate stupid behaviors, but actively reward them. First, attention economies prioritize engagement over accuracy. Media platforms elevate outrageous, oversimplified content over nuanced analysis because it generates more clicks and shares. As media theorist Neil Postman warned, when a population becomes distracted by trivia, when cultural life is redefined as a perpetual round of entertainments, when serious public conversation becomes a form of baby talk, when, in short, a people become an audience and their public business a vaudeville act, then a nation finds itself at risk. Second, polarized political systems reward tribal loyalty over rational policy assessment. Voters support measures that harm their interests simply because those measures come from their side. Politicians implement harmful policies to signal ideological purity rather than achieve positive outcomes. Third, corporate structures can institutionalize stupidity through quarterly profit pressure that overrides long-term thinking, middle managers implementing counterproductive policies to appear decisive, and organizations continuing failed strategies due to sunk cost fallacies. A particularly insidious social mechanism at work here is what psychologists call pluralistic ignorance, when individuals privately reject a norm but publicly uphold it because they incorrectly believe others accept it. Consider the company where everyone privately believes a new initiative is doomed to fail, yet no one speaks up because each person assumes they're the only one with doubts. This phenomenon explains why obviously stupid collective behaviors can persist even when most individuals privately recognize the stupidity. Everyone is afraid to be the first to state the obvious. Consider the tech company that continues pouring resources into a failing product line because we've already invested so much. Even as market signals show consumers don't want the product, executives double down rather than admit a mistake. Eventually, the company collapses, harming both shareholders and employees. What's particularly pernicious about these systems is that they can transform individually intelligent people into collectively stupid groups. What systems or organizations have you observed that seem to reward or amplify stupid behaviors? What small change might help counteract this effect? So what's the antidote to dangerous stupidity? Not just high IQ, but something deeper: wisdom. The true opposite of stupidity might best be described as wisdom, the ability to make decisions that benefit both oneself and others over meaningful timeframes. This concept aligns closely with what Aristotle called phronesis, or practical wisdom, in his virtue ethics, the capacity to know how to achieve a certain end and discern which ends are worth pursuing. For Aristotle, this wasn't just about knowledge, but about the skillful application of knowledge to real-world problems, weighing competing goods and recognizing context-specific factors. Cultivating this quality requires specific practices at both individual and societal levels. For individuals, the path begins with intellectual humility, recognizing the limits of our knowledge and remaining open to correction. As Socrates famously stated, "I know that I know nothing," a paradoxical insight that marks the beginning of true wisdom. This brings us to the fundamental challenge of epistemology, how we know what we know. The stupid often bypass this question entirely, failing to interrogate the sources of their beliefs or understand the quality of evidence supporting them. True wisdom begins with acknowledging the complexity of knowledge itself, recognizing that knowing is a process rather than a state, and understanding that different claims require different standards of evidence. This humility must be paired with critical thinking skills, evaluating sources based on reliability rather than alignment with pre-existing beliefs, understanding basic probability and statistics, recognizing common logical fallacies and cognitive biases, and genuinely considering opposing viewpoints. Consider how differently two people might approach a controversial news story. Person A immediately shares it because it confirms their worldview. Person B asks, "Who reported this? What's their track record? What evidence supports this claim? What might be missing? What do people with different perspectives say about this?" Person B exemplifies the antidote to stupidity. At the societal level, we need institutions that reward wisdom rather than merely intelligence or credentials. Educational systems emphasizing critical thinking over memorization, media prioritizing accuracy over sensationalism, political systems rewarding long-term thinking, and economic incentives aligned with sustainable outcomes. Carlo Cipolla's fifth law states, "A stupid person is the most dangerous type of person. The criminal's harm is limited by self-interest, while the stupid person's capacity for destruction knows no bounds." Before concluding, let's consider a profound question. Is human stupidity actually increasing, or are we simply more aware of it today? Throughout history, every generation has lamented the apparent stupidity of their contemporaries. Socrates complained about foolish youth in ancient Athens. Medieval scholars bemoaned the ignorance of the masses. Victorian intellectuals worried about the dumbing down of discourse. This historical pattern suggests that stupidity might be a constant in human affairs rather than something that waxes and wanes. Yet our modern environment presents unique challenges. The information ecosystem has fundamentally changed. Where knowledge was once scarce and concentrated, it's now abundant but fragmented. This creates new forms of stupidity. Overwhelmed by information volume, many people retreat to simplistic narratives provided by their in-group. The democratization of expression means stupid ideas now travel as fast as wise ones, perhaps faster, given their emotional appeal. Technology also allows us to witness stupidity on a previously impossible scale. Actions that might have remained local a century ago now become global spectacles. This creates an illusion that stupidity is increasing when we may simply be more exposed to it. Perhaps most significantly, the complexity of modern problems, climate change, global economics, technological risks, demands a level of systems thinking that our evolutionarily shaped minds don't naturally perform well. We evolved to handle immediate, visible threats rather than abstract, statistical, long-term risks. What appears as stupidity may sometimes be our ancient cognitive architecture struggling with problems it wasn't designed to solve. The wise response isn't despair, but rather the recognition that we must build systems that compensate for these limitations, social technologies that help us think better collectively than we can individually. As we wrap up, it's worth acknowledging that this battle never ends, but that doesn't mean we can't win important victories. Throughout history, humans have developed powerful tools to combat stupidity. The scientific method, principles of rational discourse, checks and balances in governance, and educational institutions designed to develop critical thinking. The question for each of us becomes, Will we contribute to stupidity's spread or its containment? Will we demand evidence before forming strong opinions? Will we create systems that reward wisdom? Will we have the courage to change our minds when facts contradict our cherished beliefs? As Hannah Arendt wrote when reflecting on the banality of evil, "The sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. Similarly, most stupidity spreads through people who never decide to think critically or uncritically. They simply follow the path of least resistance." The alternative requires effort. It means questioning not just others' assumptions but our own. It means seeking uncomfortable truths rather than comforting falsehoods. It means building communities and institutions that value wisdom. In the end, perhaps the true measure of a society isn't its technological sophistication or material wealth, but rather how effectively it mitigates stupidity's harm. By this measure, we still have much work to do. Make no mistake, this work matters profoundly. For while we fear terrorists, criminals, and tyrants, and rightly so, history suggests that unchecked stupidity has caused far greater suffering. Let's move from understanding to action. Here's what you can do starting today. Begin by examining your own beliefs and decision-making processes. What ideas do you hold not because of evidence, but because they're comfortable or socially rewarding? What decisions might you be making that could harm both yourself and others? What's one belief you've changed after encountering strong evidence against it? How did that process feel? And what made it possible for you to change your mind? 3 practical steps you can take immediately. Practice intellectual humility by regularly asking yourself, how might I be wrong about this? Diversify your information diet by deliberately seeking out thoughtful perspectives that challenge your existing beliefs. Apply the Cipolla test before major decisions by asking, could this potentially harm both me and others? If you found value in this exploration, please support our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing for more deep dives into psychology, philosophy, and critical thinking. Share this video with someone who might benefit. Remember, the most dangerous form of stupidity is believing you're immune to it. Take the first step toward genuine wisdom today by acknowledging your own cognitive vulnerabilities, then commit to the lifelong practice of overcoming them.